on behalf of W for W Foundation, welcome to another session of Friday Waters. The idea of Friday Waters is to wake the Fridays with fun and yet get fruitful content for the better understanding above water matters in different possible ways. Friday Waters has water talkies, book reading, thesis club, and water arts. The focus of Water Thesis Club is on bringing the student scholars who have done or are doing their alias research on water matters to the session in order to discuss with them the making of the thesis, research, and the issues around the subject covered. I am joined by Dr. Mansee Bal Bhargava as a discussant for today's Thesis Club session, and I hand over the session discussion to her. Before that, I will like to welcome Rinan Shah as a PhD from Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. Her areas of interest encompasses the environment and development in the political economic context. For her PhD, uh, I think Mansi, her areas of interest encompass the environment and development in political economic context. For her PhD, she studied the manifestation of domestic water scarcity in urban mountain towns of the Eastern Himalayan region. She has a research fellow in the National Mission on Himalayan Studies and has published her works in the Water Policy and Himalaya journals. She is also a contributing author to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group to Sixth Assessment Report. Now over to Mansi. Welcome, Rinan.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ekta. Thank you for starting the session. And yes, warm welcome to Rinan Shah to make her presentation on disentangling the drivers of domestic water scarcity in the Himalayan region. Most of the time we are discussing about Himalayan region, and when we talk about those region, we are often overwhelmed with the fact that in the northern part of the Himalayan region, and very few times we get to listen about the northeast, I will say, or far east region of the Himalayas. And this is where for today's presentation, we are super excited to hear a little bit more from the eastern part of the Himalayas and get to understand how come at a place which has so much of rainfall, so much of monsoon, so much of greenery, wet weather, and still there are certain situations of water scarcity, and which is getting grave with the increasing climate change. And you being part of the intergovernmental panel, I'm sure you are tackling and addressing many more issues than the water scarcity in the Himalayan region, particularly in the eastern part of the country. So thank you, Rinan, for agreeing to be our guest and present your work. I'm aware that you have completed this research, so you are moving on with further more work in the area. But for the time being, we want to hear what you did in your recent scholarship. So thank you so much. Over to you. And my questions will be asked once you make your presentation. Okay.
And please let me know when the time is closer to being up.
Yeah, good question, because we take it very disciplined way, especially for scholars. So you have 25 minutes to present, which I suppose is a good time to really express yourself.
Yeah.
So your time starts now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mansee and W for W and Ekta for having me. So let me just start off by saying that the topic of my thesis, which I completed in Feb of this year, was disentangling the drivers of domestic water scarcity in the Eastern Himalayan region. So, water in the Himalaya, I think just Mansi just mentioned, is we have a pervasive imagery of water abundance, because you feel that there are the mountains, they receive so much rain, so much snow, so there'll always be enough water. And this pervasiveness of water imagery is also, it's also shown in popular media, and even when climate change is talked about, because they talk about depleting glaciers and so on. However, aspects of shortage of water directly and aspects of food shortage due to water insecurity has been making headlines, for quite a few years. And some of us who have been working on water might know about it, but a lot of people, when I tell them that if there is water scarcity in the Himalaya, they give me quite a perplexed look. So my larger question is, why does a region with almost the highest rainfall in India face domestic water scarcity throughout the year. And it's important to know that it's a phenomena that's throughout the year, which increasing and decreasing intensities across seasons. And in the background, you can see the layout of Darjeeling town. Water scarcity studies have spoken about how scarcity it has moved on from simply being a study focused on hydrology, economics, and management towards talking about more socio-ecological aspects and behavioral aspects, as well as institutional and political economic aspects, where we say that scarcity is not natural or universal, and it depends upon how you are located as a person, that defines how you experience water scarcity. And in many cases how the water scarcity is interpreted by, for example, the government, by different institutions, affects how the policies are created to elevate such kind of water scarcity. And in many cases we fail to see how rainfall is converted into drinking water. The whole process of accessible availability to accessibility is missing in many cases. Historically, water scarcity indicators majorly use biophysical factors such as precipitation, population, and river water. And they fail because they are majorly averages. They ignore temporal variations, climatic differences, and lifestyles, and so on and so forth. So, in order to disentangle this kind of very biophysical average methodology, I have used Blila Mehta's four orders of scarcity, which begins with looking at the biophysical, then it looks at the different economic factors, moving to looking at water management aspects, and also where I've also adapted it a little to include access to communities, and then lastly how it's a process of social political processes. My thesis overall has these three chapters, which focuses on biophysical aspects, institutions and investments, and household analysis. For this, due to the keeping the time in mind, I have only focused on the first two aspects of my research. Darjeeling, as most of you all, I hope most of you all know, it is one of the hill stations in India that was set up by the British, and the population increase, urbanization happened since colonization. We had investments in tea, in Kona, also as a recruitment forces for the army, which led to the initial immigration of people from across the Himalaya, and but it has been going on it has still going on. And we have been undergoing a struggle for a separate state for more than a century. It is one of the only two mountain districts in the largely plains state of West Bengal. Yeah. Because of being the agitation of a separate state, what has resulted is that we have one of the outcomes of the first statehood, large scale statehood agitation, was the launch or was the creation of the Gorkha Territorial Administration, which is a territorial body, adding one more layer to the three layers of governance that exists in the Indian three-tier system. What it does is it tends to break up departments such as the GTA and such as the public health engineering department, where some parts is governed by the government of West Bengal and some parts by the territorial. So what this does is it tends to segregate responsibilities as well as tasks and make interaction a little difficult. You will come to know why I've talked about this in the later slides. And mostly I carried out my fieldwork from 2014 to 2019, so it has been quite a long work in process. Let us first focus on the biophysical aspects, where I talk about Hawa Pani Ko Avastha, which is the situation of climate and springs. This is, as you can see, Darjeeling town. The green spots here are the springs within the town. So, sorry. So these are the various springs where people get water from. And people have developed some infrastructure over it and to create, some reserve tanks, but they also have some small infrastructure in place. That is one major source of water for the Darjeeling town. The second is the one which is the municipality, which is located outside the town within the Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary. So small property within the wildlife sanctuary is dedicated for Darjeeling municipality, and you see one of the water sources here. And lastly, on the other side of the ridge, you have the private water tankers where they get their water from. Just as a side note, is that these three form the major water sources, but these are not the only water sources. And we have seen that how the interactions of these, the municipality being the formal, the springs being mostly commons and private, and the private water supplies interact, and how households gain access to it to create even a basic amount of water for themselves. One of the good news was that most of the springs that we saw, like half the springs, were perennial in nature. But also, we must keep in mind that springs face seasonal changes, and some of them dry up. The non-perennial ones dry up completely, and a lot of perennial springs are turning ephemeral. As well as there have been reports of changes in quality to many of the springs. We try to look at two factors, which I try to look at two factors which affect spring water. One is the rainfall, and other is the land use, land cover, because these two determine the recharge area, the kind of recharge area, and the kind of percolation that happens. However, we saw that, we saw that most of the there isn't much change in the rainfall, because there's not much change in the monthly totals of the rainfall, which meant that there might be changes in rainfall at a lower scale. So what I did was calculated rainfall events, which across the different kinds of rainfalls, and as we see here, the 25 to 50 and above that up to 100, are the ones that affect spring percolation, water percolation for spring subsistence. And we saw that there has been a decrease in the rainfall events from 25 to 150 and an increase in the high volume rainfall, which means that high volume rainfall does not equal to it does not help in percolation, because they have high surface runoff. So we are seeing a trend of, the possible changes in rainfall events that could affect spring subsistence. In terms of land use, we saw that most of the towns, as the ones that you have marked in red, that they have become extended towards the lower parts of the town, and in some cases, they have extended towards lower parts of the town, becoming more dense. So in this chapter, we concluded that more than half of the springs encountered springs were perennial, and the springs have been facing changes in quantity and quality, and it could possibly be due to decline in the rainfall, percolation rainfall events, increase in high rainfall events, and increase in the built-up area and vertical rise. So more or less, we have established the water availability is not changing as much, and it might be changing in the amount of, in the small changes that the springs are facing. Hence, we then looked at then I then looked at how this rainfall gets converted into, infrastructure, through infrastructure and investments into water at the household level. So this chapter was entitled "Apne Bhagya Ko Aaphe Kalakar." One is the maker of their own destiny. Here, I would like to draw from two papers of mine. One is the paper published in Water Policy, and the other one in the Himalaya Journal, and you can find it online. So, firstly, I would like to talk about the institutions that are available and that are there for Darjeeling water supply. So, water scarcity mostly is equated to water shortage, and we tend to try to look at it in terms of volumetric solutions, without looking at, what other changes that can happen in an institutional space. So, under the formal, we have Darjeeling municipality, which does the supply, which does the distribution, and the PHEs, which does the bulk transfer. Sorry. In the informal, we have springs, which can either be, common or private, and we have 8 to 12 kind of private suppliers, and we have the Samaj, which is the community-based organization. So how Darjeeling has been is that, because of many statehood agitations and many territorial councils and uprisings, this has in a way affected the functioning of the municipality, because for almost 14 years, from 1969 to 83, there was no commissioner or ward councillor in the municipality. And municipality, initially when it began, it was one of the first municipalities to be established in India in the 1850. It was more or less an independent body where people were elected who also had some social, social work kind of characteristics. But now it is going to be one that is governed by the political party in power, and that's how the membership changes. And so much so that we have seen many instances of dissolution of the municipality because of the differences between the state and the local government, which unfortunately hampers the workings of the municipality in terms of water supply. And so the low formal water supplies, and the water supply municipality has a very low coverage of around 15 percentage. Sometimes people have also said it might be only around 7 to 10%. And this has been a, a tussle between the regional, because the regional and the state government. As I mentioned, the institutions and the multiplicity of it creates some kind of fragmentation, because you have political differences in terms of which political body you belong to, which level of governance you belong to. Then you have issue based, where one certain part are focused on supply and certain on demand. We also have There have been fragmentation due to gaps in design, because as I mentioned, the water is in a sanctuary, then it flows through army area, then into town. So who is responsible for the infrastructure at each section changes, which also creates some kinds of differences between the state affiliated organizations and the program and the implementation of the project. So Darjeeling Water, as we see it, has multiple sources of funding and implementation, from the GTA, from the municipality, from the government of West Bengal. You have different bodies such as the military, the forest department, and Tea Board. All these interact to make or break the water infrastructure that exists. Looking at a quick look at the status of the municipality water, and here I would like to focus you all to focus on a few things. First is the water supply coverage, which is a good estimate of 15%, positive estimate, I might say. Weekly water availability is only 1 hour per week, which gives around 1,500 liters to households that get good supply. The staff to connections ratio is 26, which is a high number. On one hand, it can highlight the inefficiency of the system, but on the other, we should also consider the kind of terrain it is there and the requirement for a high number of staff. And it has one of the most exorbitant prices for connection, which is 17,000 rupees, and this was back in 2018. Which Because this whole analysis has been done in comparison with almost like 10 to 15 other cities of India, so we see that it has the highest cost of connection. What I conclude is not conclude. One of my insights is that because municipality has a lot of such difficulties, where you have high connectivity costs, low supplies, difficult to get connected, and inefficient system, it has led to the emergence of informal institutions, or private, or informal, and some are private, because municipality has been unable to scale up. They have been unable to create successful completion of projects, and informal are also considered by the households as more dependable than the municipality. So it doesn't only matter that if the infrastructure is available or not, but also how the communities see certain kind of sources and how they can base their day-to-day life around it. uh, and even in the way the formal and informal interact, another way is that the community based systems have created rules of access over municipality shared taps. So they create this only private public kind of dualism, and then create an interaction, or creating rules over systems that were created by the municipality. And in many cases, the samaj or the community systems, they instead of undoing the inequalities, sometimes tend to replicate or reinforce the hierarchies and power systems that already exist. So it's another thought to talk about, is like whether common property access and resources are always equitable or not. In another aspect, as I mentioned, we have the cantonment and the community-based systems. They kind of replicate the municipalities. That's why I've termed them pseudo-municipality systems, where they fill in for gaps where the municipality doesn't, serve. In this example, you see this image of this infrastructure of pipes, where because there's no infrastructure within the town, and they don't have any municipality supply. They have created this structure because they lie within two roads and in the middle of the mountain, so there are no roads for vehicles to come in. So the vehicles come at the top of the road, they open the outlet, and the water flows in. So communities have also created such kind of infrastructure, as well as the infrastructure supply systems that replicate the municipality where municipality fails to cover. And this, in a way, the prevalence of informal water supplies, what I've theorized is that and the inefficiencies of the formal system, it kinds of indicates the marginalization and lack of development, not only for the region as a whole, but also differentiated within the town, depending on your legality, your location, so on and so forth. As I mentioned, everyday marginalization also occurs because who gets access to the informal water systems is also defined by, whether you have the right kind of documents, whether you have land tax, and other aspects. And such groups are the ones who depend on public sources, and dependence on public sources by default means there are more number of dependents, hence less number of water. So it kind creates a kind of a ripple effect on how much water a household gets depending upon where it is located. And as you move, we have heard about the center periphery theory in many urban works. But here, what also happens is we also have an altitudinal aspect. So when you move away from the center and down the slope, the municipality supply starts disappearing. So you have fewer and fewer pipes down the road, and which means fewer supplies, not only fewer private supplies, but also fewer public supplies. And there is a complete absence of grievance redressal mechanism, because many a times when you have asked people what do you do if there's no water, it's like they first of all they have to figure out it's actually, the connection is not, it's not the connection that's not working, and it's not that your supply is delayed. So they figure out the connection is spoiled, you go and fix it yourself. The whole process entails another water turn of yours being missed out. The kind of exclusion or pushing away of households that happens due to processes, formalities, costs coming in makes citizens as disconnected citizens, and we which is for the region as a whole, but also within the region you have different communities, different groups, socioeconomic status, where you're located, where informal, formal settlement, so different groups are facing different kinds of exclusion. And people, because of these inaccessible basic services, people find alternate ways to acquire them. That is also one way in which we see that informal water supplies has been the go-to for people, because of the push, or the pushing away of people from the municipality. Overall, some conclusions that I have made from my thesis, I can expand on it more when if you want it. So what we have seen is that we have formal and informal water provisioning systems, and springs. Formal and informal water provisioning systems, which have a variety. Under the formal, we have the municipality. Informal, we have private and spring. And private, we have around 12 different kinds of suppliers, 8 to 12. Because of the difficulties of successful projects, and the full the situation is kind of adding resources to a leaky bucket, where you're adding more water to it, but you're not looking at the at the kind of access that you're creating. So people feel, the institutions and the municipality and the state, they're failing to understand what their philosophy of access is. How do they understand access, and how are they looking to elevate water scarcity? Lastly, the marginalizations environmentally, politically, financially, as well as the geographical distance has somehow interact to create the water scarcity that exists in the mountains. So going back to my question that I began with, why does a region with almost the highest rainfall in India face domestic water scarcity throughout the year? I would like to conclude with two large statements, which can be called a little generic, because I try to, put it all in together. So even in the absence of significant changes in climate, the problem of scarcity always remains. And the whole process of translation to availability to accessibility becomes like a multiple hurdle race. So you need like kind of a multi-pronged approach to handle many things where the problems emerge. There is political unwillingness, insufficient funds, failure of cooperation, and inadequacies in local governance, because the institutional capacity, not only in terms of technologically but also in terms of innovation, is somewhat missing in the region. Uh, but it could also in a way be ascribed to the political volatility of the region. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rinan, and wonderful presentation. So simplified, talk about such a complex situation back there in the Eastern Himalayas. So, as a process, let me just summarize what is presented by you. Um, First of all, you did talk about an important aspect, that how water scarcity is perceived in a different way. And it is not actually equivalent to water shortage. It's the fact that you started the presentation with a very pertinent question, which you also ended your presentation with. Why does the region with almost the highest rainfall faces domestic water scarcity throughout the year? I think this is something which most of the part of the country now has to question and find answers for it. But places like Eastern Himalayas has more, a third dimension which you also raised in your presentation. When we talk about the center and periphery approach in urbanization in hilly regions, you also get to see the impact of altitude. Uh, you also did mention that you used three-pronged approach in research, the biophysical, which is often looked at when we talk about the water scarcity. But then you said that you have extended it to looking at social and institutional aspects, where you carried out institution study as well as household studies. So that is where you talked about your methods, but then an interesting aspect which came out from your presentation, and that is again a typical aspect of being in the Himalayas, and especially places like Darjeeling and all, where you talked about the where in country we have these three layers of governance, but you have a kind of a fourth layer, which is more of a territorial, and that increases the complexity of coordination between the institutions. Very beautifully laid local, I think, language line, which talks about Hawa Pani Ko Avastha, where you really tell us the situation of climate and springs, and you lay out the locations of the three layers of water systems which are present in Darjeeling. The springs, which are more community or I think private water layer systems, but importantly, the government or public water supply is very minimum to 15%, positively estimated, as your words were. And then the third approach is the private water supply, which I have a question on. Is that also a groundwater or the spring water system, which I think will be my small query, but clarification. And when you talked about another interesting aspect, which is your paper also, Apnai Bhagya Ko Afai Kalakar, basically you are maker of your own destiny, where you highlight this paradox of having this system of institutions, the formal layout and the informal arrangement of water system in the region. And you do talk about the pseudo municipality system, where I think it's an overlay of the private water system and the biophysical limitations which are there. An important aspect which comes out from your presentation is the fact that the marginalizing of the people or the vulnerable people in the town. And something which I wasn't aware of is the connection charge for every household for the city is way too high than the average of the national level connection charges. So that also tells how difficult it is to lay out a water supply system which pushes the society there to really explore systems which are more decentralized, more community based, or even private based for that matter. So these are some of my takeaways from the presentation. I hope I did a justice to your presentation and summary. And that brings me to some of the questions which I have for you, especially because you have seen rest of the country and have traveled and also did your PhD in mainland India, I must say, than the Himalayas, which is plains. And then you do talk about this perception of water scarcity vis-a-vis water shortage. What makes you really come up with this kind of observation in your mind?
Uh, because I think it's also experiential. Because for me, I tell people that if you're from the mountains and they say that they have not faced water scarcity, probably they are too elite, or like, because everybody has a story related to water. Like most of my classmates from school used to fill water in the morning, come back. It was a thing in the hostel also, because you didn't have running water to access. You have water, you always had stored water to access. Like even in hostels, everything is timed. So I think for us, we have always had this experience. And I think I've mentioned, hopefully my thesis will come online soon, but I've also mentioned these experiences, and how once I move out from the city, once I moved out into the plains, and the mainland, I didn't even have to think if I open my tap I get water or not. So I think that's a very big difference. And somebody had also rightly said that water at the tap in Darjeeling has moved to become a luxury item rather than a basic necessity, because of all these difficulties, and the aspiration that comes in. And yeah.
Yeah, very well put. But let me add here, because I also talk quite a lot on the extravaganza of water used by the elites, which is pan India. I mean, and probably Darjeeling sees it more because there are uh, probably more people who are suffering, and then only those few who are getting those luxury can be really noticed very easily. But
Yeah.
places like Ahmedabad and Bangalore, it's like
Mm.
water flowing in our taps like 24/7. And if there were more hours in the day, it will flow then also.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
that brings me to the next question, which is more related to the three methods which you have tried to integrate in your research, and
Mhm.
rightfully mentioned that altitude also plays, kind of a additional layer of complexity when we are talking about institutions. I mean, whether corporation or in your case in of Darjeeling, you have this territorial governance which also has a stake in the way things will be decided and executed on the ground. So I mean, because territorial governance was already implemented during the time of Britishers. It's there since then, if I am not mistaken, to my little knowledge about the place. But then where do you think the water governance really is playing its part in terms of major decision when it comes to household distribution? Shouldn't it be the prerogative of the local municipality than the state or the territory to decide how much water to whom?
Yeah. So first of all, to the territorial question, the agitation movement has been there for a long time, but
Yes.
territorial council was given in 1988, post the statehood agitation of 86-88. So that was sanctioned constitutional. It was the one of the first autonomous hill councils outside of the northeast of India as a geographical region. So, and the complexity comes, as you rightly mentioned, the responsibility is of the municipality. The distribution is of the municipality. So, a lot of fingers can be pointed at the local municipality, because I think somehow, in a way that, they should also understand their philosophy of accessibility, how they define scarcity. And but the majority of the supply, the bulk supply, is done by the PHEs, the Public Health and Engineering Department. Also, could be because the expertise involved. So the
Yes.
expertise involved, because PHE is a more focused technical kind of a body,
The
whereas a
state body.
municipality, yeah, municipality is an elected body, and they do have their own water department, but they are very few in number and mostly depend. They only focus on distribution.
Yeah, wonderful. So when you were talking about these many springs which are there, and you have a beautiful map over the GIS to show them. I'm curious that are most of them community managed, and what kind of traditional management systems you could see, and how they have transformed into the modern system. I mean, have they managed to integrate with the municipal system, or is municipal really regulating certain aspects of it? What is going on there?
So I think firstly, the most important thing to remember about springs is this groundwater. And
Yeah.
groundwater comes under the rent law of the country, also a left remnant of the colonizers, is
Yes.
that whatever is under the ground is yours. So
Yes.
I think this question came up also in the afternoon where I was involved in another discussion. Is I think it stems from there. So what happens is the municipality has zero stake in it. They don't look at anything related to the spring. So whatever large uh, there are quite a few large public popular springs that has been given for the public, at the behest of the owners goodwill, owners of the land. So there are these big public springs which have been given to the public. So it's mostly works as public community springs. But what I have noticed is that smaller springs, which are like which might not be publicly given, have a lot. There have been lots of cases of privatization of springs, and in many cases. Yeah, so in certain areas initially there used to be 4 springs. Now there are 2 springs because people are building over it, and some of them might own perennial springs, but they use it for profit, not for a community. So I think it's a lot dependent on probably maybe further, if you try to intertwine, it is also related to the economy of this place, and how people might make money. So yeah, I think firstly is the rent law and who the ownership rides on, and the municipality has no stake on it. They haven't done anything for springs. Mostly whatever work is done by communities. They have done the technical innovations. They have put pumping systems, created storage, created rules over that, but municipality has not done anything yet.
Just at the hindsight, do you think that if municipality intervenes into the spring system, there may be better chances of? This is just a question which is coming out of.
Mm-mm.
I wasn't prepared to ask this, but just out of curiosity, do you think we can envisage more fairness or justice in the distribution if there is more negotiation between municipality and the community in terms of the springs or water management from the springs?
So the communities themselves have like well-oiled systems right now of their supply. However, sometimes whenever you think like it is important in a way, maybe in I'm just thinking out loud, maybe in a way that when big springs, what if they get privatized, right? What if
Yeah.
people don't want to make them public anymore? So there should be some kind of foresight, some kind of awareness about how which direction. I think that's very important because springs are declining. They're declining in quality and quantity. So I think they should have a foresight in terms of could we do something about it.
Some regulations in advance. After all, we anticipate. Nowadays we cannot really see government doing its role in that direction, but at least we anticipate government to be working for the welfare
Yeah.
state or towards the welfare state, so in that way, and also seeing the fact that even now rivers, a part of rivers are getting privatized. If smaller
Mm.
springs are already getting privatized and larger springs have still till now managed to remain public, or some people have offered it to the public good, uh, it is good time to really have certain soft rules to be laid out before things go out of the hand. That's just my basic understanding of the place. Coming to and let me just ask all the participants, if you have any questions, please be ready, because I am itching towards my last couple of questions, but it is also to warm me up to really ask your questions, and also put your questions and comments in the chat box. But you may also raise your hand to have your questions. One of the questions again is, emerging out of the springs, because that was the major interesting part for me in the biophysical aspect of water availability, because municipal water is not really that much, and I'm assuming they are also extracting from the spring and distributing. That's my understanding. So when you talk about that the springs are turning to be ephemeral, and when we are already seeing the impact of climate change, especially in the Himalayan regions and all, where is the timeline when you are really seeing that water scarcity gets acute? You are already saying that it is acute, but then we are also reaching at some plains in the mainland where we are reaching day zero. I hope Darjeeling does not see that day, but still there must be some kind of predictions and projections made by some scholars. Is there any study like that where red alarm has been already raised?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the municipality gets its water from outside the municipality.
Or in
So
the
it's from,
forest?
yeah, so not in the vicinity. So it comes from the forest.
But are they
And
also springs, or they are some other sources?
there are
Surface?
springs and streams.
Ah,
So and I think that is one part where I missed because there were too many things. Is that initially, during the monsoons, the flow of these. So there used to be 26 streams. That's the standard line you will find. 26 streams that feed the Darjeeling municipality system. But with time, it has reduced to around 20 because of more population around the forest. And uh, and the water during monsoons is so much that the municipality tanks are all filled. There are three supply tanks. Two are filled. One works only to half its capacity. It is so filled that they have to reduce the number of springs that come into the tank. So the
hmm.
excess water availability is at an excess. And I think when you come from Siliguri and when you fly into Siliguri and then take the car into Darjeeling, you will see the amount of water that flows down your sides is mostly coming from the same watershed.
Hmm.
Secondly, about what was your question? The second part?
Okay, my question was basically to look at how these springs can be really
Mm.
looked at from municipal corporations' point of view. I mean, if they can really utilize it in another way.
Yeah, there was a very very interesting project proposal by one of the old engineers to the department, but it never got sanctioned. So it was
Yeah,
you had a bigger project over the smaller spring
and
project.
yeah, and my alarming question was: are there any studies done which
Yeah.
shows that the red alarm that there may be day zero for Darjeeling also, or we have a fair arrangement where the current acute shortage is already worked out, so that future day zeros can be
I think somehow I feel Darjeeling, Shimla, and all already have had the D zeros long time back.
okay.
But
Okay, so
now what is probably happening is
we
people have learned to live with it. I haven't presented that here because when I have looked down and gone and seen water access at the household level, you see the volumes are extremely low, which also quite indicates in one way that how has the behavioral aspects of water consumption been changing. And that's something which I'm working towards, to see how people have atrociously low levels of water there. Unfortunately, yeah, we don't have much information on that, and I have tried to do a household level analysis, and hopefully I can talk about that soon.
Yeah. My next question to you is this beautifully written part on informally formal and formally informal. And when you talk about the existence of Samaj, and especially their rules created for access and the shared water, and this whole breaking of public-private dualism. So when you talk about this system existing, just for my clarification and then the question itself, Is it parallel to what you call as the community water system? And how big are these samaj, or and how many of them are there?
Okay, so I think so that's I think another work in all, because Samaj is a community-based organization and very popular in the Eastern Himalayan, especially in Sikkim and Darjeeling. So they initially began as, it has a very tragic beginning, because the first one was established in Darjeeling, where there were a lot of people that were coming into the hills, and a lot of people were, they say they were not, they when they died, they didn't have people to take care of them. So Samaj initially came up with that concept of helping people who
Yeah.
were on their last in their last stage of life and giving them an honorable farewell. And then with time they moved on to also consider water as one of their main. Now at this current stage we have Samaj that is created on various lines. So you have ethnic Samajas, religious, then you have geographical. So the one that I work on is mostly geographical because they are bound by the spring. So you have a
Yes.
spring, and the Samaj is around the spring. So I focus on that kind of Samaj.
Okay. My last question, which I was not actually covered in the research, but pardon my ignorance. But when we listen to the word Darjeeling, we can only imagine of tourism. So I want to ask you a question. When you talk about disparity in access to water, and when we talk about elites having more access to water, how does a place play in the hands of tourism? My recent experience to Haridwar, Rishikesh was that there were more tourist population than the local resident population, and that also plays a devil in when we talk about access to all kinds of services, water being one of them. So Darjeeling being such a popular tourist place, especially for the people of West Bengal and whole of Northeast for that matter, do you think that water also gets uh, fairly shared to those who can afford, and that those are tourists, of course, and that also impacts the access to water to the vulnerable people?
Yeah, I think one and I haven't covered the tourism aspect in my
Yes.
work, but but there are a lot of stories around it. A lot of stories of how tankers get kidnapped by hotels on the way to serving the households. So tankers get kidnapped on the way. So that also happens, and the tourism overall has moved on from being a seasonal thing into a year-long thing. So
Yes, that's
initially,
another problem.
yeah. So initially, I think I started my master's thesis in 2014. That time when we were just focusing on seasonal populations, we were seeing that, so in seasons, high seasons with high
Yeah.
population was overlapping with the dry season. So that's also very important, because your high season peak is the peak dry season, because people come from in the summers. And but now tourists come throughout the year. They are here even during the chilly winters. They're here throughout the year. So I think that's probably another additional factor we need to look at, to see how this changing pattern in tourism might also be affecting the water. And most of the hotels have used private tankers,
Yes.
and they might have some municipality connections. So another aspect is also to look at how the municipality connection flows within the town. Some have like bigger inch pipes, some have smaller inch pipes. Where you're located, the timing of the connections, all of them interact to allow for more or less water.
Absolutely. I think very well put points. And I have a serious concern on this whole tourism business also. And I see Preeti has put some comment or question in the chat box. So maybe we open the floor for our participants to ask you questions or send their comments to you. Thank you so much for answering these questions. I hope it was not too much for you, but I was really enjoying this conversation with you. So maybe I invite now people to ask their questions. You may please unmute yourself and ask your question, or if you have any comments for Rinan. So Preeti, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I was in Darjeeling. I was at Tiger Hill last year. I was at Senchil. And the points that ma'am you raised were real. And So in fact, we have made a film at the Tiger Hill Senchal Devi Temple on plastic free Senchal. So that was a really good project where we saw the lot of offering to Devi was actually dumped there itself. And since there were religious aspects linked to the offerings, it was not given to the municipal community. And in our film also, that part is there. So I was very connected with that. I don't know if that was included here because I was not available for some time. But yeah, is all year round tourism promoted? Because we see here in Ladakh also that tourism is a one of the major livelihood option, and people are willing to like have their restaurants or homestays or guest houses or hotels open even in winter time when there is a really scarce availability of the water. So I think the same must go with Darjeeling as well, or you can answer that better. Like, how is it? One side we have water scarcity, but the other side we look at the economy and the livelihood option where majority of the people are. So how is it happening there?
I think it's majorly the same because tourism is the most is one of the most strong economic sources of income for the people. And as long as the tourists come, they will serve the tourists. And sometimes, and they do, of course, they do have certain signages in place where they ask for people to use less water and all that. But I think it's also the responsibility of the tourists to be aware of where they are heading to, and be aware of the local constraints that already exist in a place.
It's a choice which local people make, and local, of course, local leadership and local decisions. Because after all, water cannot be produced out of economy, and that is something which I think policymakers and most of the business people are not learning about it, and the environmentalists will keep talking about it. But the fact remains fact that water cannot be produced out of good economy, whatever we do and say. So anyway,
Yeah, but I think then the question goes back to economy, and then we have to look at, is there other sources of economy being, supported for by the state, right?
yeah,
So if this people are left to fend for themselves, if there are no opportunities, if there are no employment opportunities, if there are no other ways of doing, people will make do with the best of what they have,
yeah.
right? And for here, it of course it is the way in which resources, natural resources are being consumed. But I think it's also this tragic complex where you
Yes.
don't have any other sources of income. So
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's a paradox that we get more people to create more water problem. More
Yeah.
water because the share of water gets multiplied with the people. So I mean, but that's a different discussion altogether. We can go on discussing that some
Mm.
other time. So if there are any other questions, or Ekta, if you have any question, we will take it now. Yeah, you have to unmute
So,
Ekta. Yeah.
yeah. So, Mansi, it's a great learning and a very true question that about tourism. That how tourism should go there. It's a major economic system, and it's a major part from where the people get their livelihood at the tourist places. But is tourism supporting the livelihood, or it can be the ecological imbalance? Because I feel that whenever the tourists go to some place, they will just enjoy the beauty, but they cannot get connected to their system. So there should be some other way in tourism, so that what do you think, Rinan? My question is that instead of providing all the facilities, don't you think that the tourism should be some other way where people can enjoy the real place, so that people can come to that place and then have not only this watching, coming and going, they can have the real feel how the people
Yeah.
live, and there can be some shift of tourism to that. So
Yeah.
I think that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also a very, I think that the also behavioral aspect comes into play,
Yes.
because what we have also seen, like, because I've also been living in the plains, and then, when I took interviews during my household, they'll be like, even if their own children have gone into the plains and come back for the holidays, they get damn nervous because, you have been used to using so much water. So that's how the plains
Mm.
people are synonymous with, because they use water. They say pani khalkhal chalo, so you'll use water like, splashing a lot. So somehow, the tourists have, in I think there have been works in Shimla and other places where they speak about how tourists have similar expectations of comfort, have certain expectations of comfort. So I think,
Yes.
so that's why I feel what you said. No, they should be aware of the local context, and they should be also. It's a big behavioral change as well as a consumerist. Moving on from being more consumerist to being more conscious. I think that's very important. Yeah.
That's
Yes. So
a completely different discussion which we have to hold for Darjeeling.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, are there any other questions from any participants here? Okay. Okay, we can call it off for the day. Thank you so much, Rinan. And let me just do the announcement for the coming sessions. So, in the forthcoming Wednesdays for water, which is May 24th, we are actually discussing with Padma Shri Lakshman Singh ji, and we talk about the Chauka technique of water conservation, which is and not only influenced by Israel, but we are getting it back to Israel also from India and the courtesy Lakshman Singh ji. And the conversation is going to be in Hindi. And the next Friday Waters is on the first week, the last week of this month, which is on water talkies and water arts, and we talk about the dews of diamonds. And in there we have a young musicologist and singer and filmmaker Faraz Khan, who is going to also launch his small film on drought, which he calls Dews of Diamonds, and at the same time, he is also going to make a live performance with us, and that will be also hosted by me and Sonia from Wiki WRC. And that's announcement for the coming week. Thank you so much, all of you, and thanks to Ekta for organizing this event for us, and thank you, Rinan, once again for the wonderful presentation and
Thank you.
importantly, the wonderful conversation we had together. A lot of learning from you.
Thank you
Ekta?
so much. Same
Yeah,
here.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mansee. Thanks, Rinan, for this wonderful session. For all the audience, join us on every third Friday for knowing about more theses to learn from more scholars. So, thank you so much for this wonderful session, Rinan, once again.
Thank
So,
you.
definitely a lot of things to discuss, but with the time frame, we have to close the session now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
the next thesis club is on 16th of June when we are
16.
talking about 16th of June,
Third.
and that's with Priyanka Kanhare, and we talk about the riverfront and the ecology of riverfront. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you.